Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
And this week is going to be part 2 of our deep dive into the Long Island serial killer case. Finally, the last set of remains to be found actually belonged to a female whose torso was originally found in 1997 by authorities.
It does kind of seem maybe they were inexperienced. They didn't know how to dispose of a whole body properly, or they were too nervous. So they cut it up so it's easier to handle. They talked to a truck driver murderer. He was a serial killer, I guess, who was a truck driver. He would travel along the main highways. And he explains that there are at least 7 other serial murder truck drivers that he personally knows that are still out there.
It's crazy to think like how many serial killers, there's so many out there. Ridiculous. Like, it's so crazy and really scary to think of.
Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my 2 sisters, Stephanie and Katie. And this week is going to be part 2 of our deep dive into the Long Island serial killer case. And if you didn't listen to part 1, go back and take a listen. But just a quick recap, in that part we just talked about the initial disappearance of Shannan Gilbert, who was a woman who went missing, and the search for her body ended up uncovering the bodies of 4 other women who went missing under very suspicious circumstances in the years earlier, and then also the discovery of 6 more bodies after that. So the police realize that they have a potential serial killer, or very likely a serial killer on their hands. And in this part of the episode, we're going to go a little bit more into this second set of bodies that was found, which was a total of 6. And I'm going to go a little bit into them and kind of a connection into an old cold case that had happened 14, 15 years earlier. And going to talk a little bit about the mysteries that's still surrounding that. And then Katie's going to talk a little bit about some of the theories that were initially kind of out there, or are still out there, about the serial killer. So that's what we're going to be covering this time. Thank you for joining us. This is actually, I don't know if we said it last time, but this deep dive is going to be our final case of the season that we're going to be talking about. So we'll have 4 parts. And then after our 4th part, we will be taking a bit of a hiatus for our until next season, like we always do. So thank you so much for being here for part 2, and I'll just get right into it because we do have a lot to cover in this part as well. Yeah, as we mentioned in the previous episode, the search for Shannan Gilbert's body in late 2010 resulted in the discovery of 4 bodies, eventually identified as 4 young female escorts from the New York area, who had all been reported missing from the years 2007 to 2010. And then as the police expanded their search along that same stretch in the following months, they found the remains of 6 more bodies, leading to the 10 known victims, all linked and suspected to have been killed by the Long Island serial killer. As CBS News reports, the 6 other bodies found were Karen Vergata, who was an escort that had been missing since 1996, and only her skull was found, which is what the investigators used to identify her. So at first she was just known as a Jane Doe, but then eventually it came out that it was missing woman Karen Vergata. So she was an escort. She went missing in 1996. So by the time her body was found, it had already been, 14, 15 years. The second body was identified to be Valerie Mack, and she was also an escort. She went missing in 2000. And for a while, she went unidentified, much like Karen Vergata, and she was only known as Jane Doe, but the ID was eventually made and connected to Valerie Mack. The third body was Jessica Taylor, and she was a missing escort who had been missing for 8 years. She was last seen in 2003. A young female toddler was also found. The Long Island Press reports that, quote, the skeletal remains of baby Doe, estimated to be between 1 and 4 years old, were found wrapped in a blanket with a 16-inch gold-colored chain and 2 gold-colored hoop earrings, end quote. And then the next body that was found was an Asian male that was wearing women's clothes. To this day, this Asian male has not been identified, so we still don't know who that is. And then finally, the last set of remains to be found actually belonged to a female whose torso was originally found in 1997 by authorities. So investigators were actually able to link the set of remains found to that torso from 1997, and they discovered that these body parts that they were finding in 2011 was the same victim from 1997 who had been nicknamed Peaches years earlier because of a Peaches tattoo that was found on the torso that they originally found. The remains that police found in 2011 were 6 miles away from where the toddlers were found, but the police were able to confirm through DNA analysis that Peaches was the mother of the toddler that was found. Out of the second set of 6 bodies to be found, these 2 victims were the 2 furthest apart in distance. The rest were kind of found somewhat close to each other, but the distance between the toddler's remains and Peaches' remains were furthest apart, which is sad, since they were the 2 that were connected to each other. And so the body parts that were found in April of 2011 were arms and legs. So they find the arms and the legs in 2011. They found the torso in 1997, and her head has yet to be found. So I'm going to take you back a little bit to June of 1997 when this torso was originally found, because it's just quite a sad story and kind of miraculous that a lot of other body parts of hers were then later discovered 14 years later. It's just kind of crazy how it all connected. But on June 28th, 1997, when the torso was originally found, it was found alongside Park Drive in Hempstead Lake State Park. And this is roughly a 25 to 30 minute drive from the Gilgo Beach area where the rest of her remains would be found nearly 14 years later. So it was actually a hiker that found the torso in a black plastic bag inside a green Rubbermaid container. Police estimated that at that time that the person had been killed no more than 3 days prior to the discovery. So along with the body, there was a maroon towel and a dark colored pillowcase that had flowers on it. At the time, police were able to determine that Peaches was a black female between the ages of 16 and 30 years old, and she had a surgical scar that indicated she had a C-section at one time, and this obviously led police to the conclusion that this woman had a child, or had given birth at one point. So that revelation came out in 2010, or it was revealed, I guess, to the public, or kind of focused on in the public in 2010. And at that time, the Lieutenant William Brosnan of Nassau County said, quote, "Somewhere out there, she has a child, and at this point, that child is at least 13 years old," end quote. And so it's kind of sad that a year after he made that statement in 2010, they actually found this toddler that was later identified to be that child of Peaches. So fortunately, she was not at least 13 years old. She was, like I said, between 1 and 4 years old and had died probably around at the same time as Peaches herself. So because Peaches' skull had yet to be found, the police are unable to produce a composite sketch of her. So we don't have a composite sketch. We don't know what her face looked like, or can't really identify her. She was only given that nickname of Peaches because of that tattoo that they originally found on the torso back in 1997. However, they did release that photo of the Peaches tattoo to a tattoo magazine, according to the Long Island Press, and this eventually prompted a tip from a tattoo artist in Connecticut saying that it was his work and that he had given this tattoo and done this tattoo for Peaches. So when he calls in his tip, the tattoo artist says that he recalled this woman visiting Connecticut from Long Island with her cousin and her aunt, and she did mention something about having boyfriend trouble at that time. He also said that he did not have Peaches' real name on file, of course. For some reason, he just didn't keep it on file. So he doesn't have a name, but he knows that this woman did come in to get that tattoo. She had 2 people with her, an aunt and a cousin, and she said something about being in Connecticut because she had boyfriend trouble back home, and she was visiting her family in Connecticut. So the extremities of Peaches' body, so her arms and legs, that were found in 2011 by the police, they were also found wearing similar gold jewelry to that of the jewelry found on the remains of baby Doe. So to this day, the identity of Peaches and her child remain unknown. So that had been kind of a cold case that back from 1997, where it was like they found this torso of this woman, given the nickname Peaches. They don't know who she was. They were probably looking or investigating so that they could identify this person. But little did they know that 14 years later, the police were going to find other body parts kind of in a separate location, and also that of her child. So it is very, very sad that they were able to connect those two, and unfortunately kind of give that gruesome outlook, or that gruesome kind of paint that picture of this woman and her child having been killed. And so it's just really, really sad. So before I go into like the next part of this, where there is a little bit of a development, did you guys have any thoughts about that part of the investigation?
I didn't know anything about that investigation. That is super sad. Like, it's crazy that after all this time that they've found her remains. I mean, hopefully they can actually put a name to the bodies that they found, but it is really sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. And I also heard that there was speculation that whoever did kill them intentionally put Peaches, the mother, and the baby far apart so that, even though they were dead, they wouldn't have that connection still. So they kind of did that intentionally. It's just like one last act of being maniacal, I guess. So that's creepy and sad.
Yeah, it's like creepy, and it's just like so dark and twisted, but also like obviously Peaches was dismembered. I mean, her body parts are being found miles apart or different locations, so obviously that's gruesome in and of itself. But my question is like just curious, like I was just wondering if you guys thought, like, it's weird to me that like only her torso would be found. Like, why was her torso put somewhere else than the rest? Because like her legs and her arms were found in 2011 near the other bodies, or close enough to these 9 other bodies to be kind of connected. So it's weird that just her torso would be found, and then like why? So the killer went and just separated all the parts. I mean, they never found her skull yet. To this day, haven't found her skull, so maybe they'll eventually find that somewhere else. But it's also just very strange that like this body was dismembered and placed in multiple locations. And the first one was found so close to when she actually died. Like I said, the police were able to determine in 1997 when they found the torso that she had probably only been dead, 3 days at the most. So it didn't take long at all for the torso to be found. So it's just weird that these other body parts, do you think they were eventually, like, do you think that they were put there back in 1997, like the arms and the legs, or were they maybe moved there later? Like, do you guys have any kind of thoughts about that? Because to me, it's just weird that just the torso would be found, but the other ones weren't found like super far apart. I mean, obviously miles apart, like a 30-minute drive, but I don't know. I was just kind of curious about that part of it. Like, do you think the killer got maybe scared when they found the torso and moved the bodies? I don't know. I was just kind of thinking about that.
It almost makes me wonder if, like, when the person killed Peaches, whether he was, like, this was his first time and he was, like, not good at it, so he was just cutting her up and then putting her in different spots because he was panicking, or, like, he wanted to make sure that nobody would find him if they were all in different locations. Like, to me, it kind of sounds like a first-time kill to me, but also it does seem weird that they were, like, spread out. That's my initial thinking of it, maybe, but I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I have no idea.
Yeah, so I actually have a few thoughts on this. So yeah, what Steph was saying is one of the theories that came up, where this person that dismembered these victims, they're saying if it is the same killer, then it does kind of seem maybe they were inexperienced. They didn't know how to dispose of a whole body properly, or they were too nervous. So they cut it up so it's easier to handle, easier to dispose of. And then kind of as they got more comfortable, that's when they would start disposing whole bodies. That was one theory. And yeah, and also like Steph was saying, also you always hear of killers when they kill someone and they have them in pieces, they would leave different pieces in different dumpsters to make it less obvious. Or, so if someone did find one piece, they couldn't find the whole thing, so it would be harder for them to put the pieces together, as in like finding like the clues to put together who actually did it. So that makes sense as well. So maybe that's what they were doing, kind of dispersing the parts around, make it harder for someone to find. Also, I'm going to go into this a little bit, where there are theories, like I was saying, that there is more than one serial killer, and it was like the Long Island serial killer who they believe killed the Gilgo 4. the original serial killer was like territorial, and they're saying that, oh, now he's encroaching into my dumping ground. So then he takes previous parts from bodies that he killed, puts them there to kind of mark his territory kind of thing. That seems kind of far-fetched, but I do kind of go into that a little bit, where people are thinking like they're kind of competing with each other. So just like super sinister and really hard to like wrap your head around.
Yeah, because obviously like Peaches' body, or the torso, was found only 3 days or less after she was killed. So did like the killer get spooked and was like, oh shit, like the torso was found so quickly, so maybe, I guess, just put the other body parts there. And obviously it took 14 years for them to be found later. I think at the time when the torso was found, I think the theory was that maybe the other body parts, like maybe the arms or the legs, had like a tattoo that was very identifying. Like maybe it had the name of someone, or maybe it had a date or something like that. So maybe they thought, oh, that's why those body parts are missing, because they got rid of them, because that would be more identifying. Whereas maybe the peach tattoo is a little bit more like a general one. It's harder to kind of pin down. So that was one theory, but obviously I don't think it ever came up like that the arms or the legs had. But I guess they found them 14 years later, so there was been like no flesh left on it, right? It would just be bones, right? Like the arm bone and the leg bone. So maybe that is true. Like maybe there was sort of another tattoo that was very identifiable on those other body parts, and that's why they weren't with the torso. But I guess there are other serial killers who do disperse the body parts, so that's not necessarily why they did it, was because of this tattoo. But that was just one thing that was thought. So that was interesting that did come up. But overall, just like super sad. And obviously, why kill the child? Like the child is like 1 to 4 years old. Like that doesn't fit the profile of any of these other people. And that's the only child that was found. So it's like, just seems unnecessary. Like if the child was just had to be kind of like sacrificed because maybe she had witnessed something, or just terrible either way. But I don't know, just sad. So there was like a little bit of a development in this that still leaves a lot of questions, and it's a mystery. But there was a Facebook post that was actually posted by the Mobile Police Department in Alabama, and it was posted on October 7th of 2022. And the post said, quote, "The FBI is seeking relatives and friends of Elijah Lige, Lige, I don't know how to pronounce that, but Elijah Lige Howell / Howard, 1927 to 1963. Mr. Howard lived in Pritchard, Alabama with his wife Carrie, and passed away in Mobile, Alabama in 1963 with Miss Lily Mae Wiggins Packer. His relatives may be able to assist in the case of a woman and a child found in another state. Does this tattoo look familiar? If anyone has any information, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI or www.tips.fbi.gov." So with that text, they also put a picture of that Peaches tattoo that was originally released back in 1997. So very weird. They somehow were able to kind of think that this person named Elijah Howell or Howard, who died in 1963, may have been connected in some way to Peaches or knew her or something. And so they're asking for this person's relatives, obviously because he died in 63, to come forward, and maybe that'll lead them to something. So the Long Island Press, they take a quote from a guy named Josh Zeman in their article about this update. And so Josh Zeman investigated the case in the 2016 docuseries The Killing Season that we've mentioned throughout this in last part and this part as well. And Josh says, quote, "I would assume the FBI ran the DNA, which means Peach's DNA, through genealogy sites and got the hit, then passed along the info to the local PD in Mobile," end quote. And then he says, quote, "The dead end is interesting, hence why there might not be a missing persons report on a missing adult and toddler," end quote. So that does seem very reasonable, or probably likely, that they were able to run the DNA through this sort of like genealogy sites, since there's so many of them now, and they were able to determine that Peaches was connected to this man somehow, and hopefully his relatives that are still out there might be able to know something. So how this man, like how Mr. Howard might be related to Peaches and her toddler, is still unknown, or at least unknown to the public. So that's kind of where that ends with the whole investigation into Peaches and her toddler. Potentially a lead, but as far as I know, no one's ever come forward from that tip to say that, oh, I was related to this man, Elijah Howard, and he, but maybe it's out there now, so who knows? Relatives of the relatives could know something, but it's just unfortunate that nothing more has come out. that we know yet.
Yeah, I always find it sad when they find remains and just nobody comes forward and nobody knows who they are. It's like somebody had to know these people and somebody's missing them, but they just haven't been able to connect the dots like that. I find that always super sad.
Yeah, like why would someone not come forward? Like if it's out there in such a big way, like on Facebook, and it's like going viral or it's like out in the news, like if you know that person, why would you not then come forward? If you can help, right? Like I just feel like, you know, if there was a post saying like relatives of this person who died this many years ago, come forward, maybe you know something. Why would you not do that?
I guess, yeah. Or maybe they just didn't see the post. They just aren't aware that they're looking for them, right? Yeah, so going further into the Killing Season series that AJ just mentioned and that I've been talking about. So there's 2 documentarians named Joshua Zeman and Rachel Mills, and they dive deep into this case, and of course they're trying to uncover the truth, see if they can figure out who the Long Island serial killer is. And I mean, they deep dive. So there are 8 45-minute episodes, and they go down like every rabbit hole there is out there, trying to leave no stone unturned. And a lot of what is uncovered is just speculation. It's like web sleuths putting theories out there, trying to connect the dots, a lot of rumors, people pointing fingers at people. I'm going to talk some about the theories briefly, just because I think they're interesting. I'm one of those people that like to kind of be like, how is this connected? And like, this seems weird. And, you know, there's patterns here. So I just kind of wanted to explore this. And I think some of it is interesting to look at.
Yeah. Oh, I love to speculate. I come up with a million theories in my own mind. So
yeah, exactly.
I like to hear other people's
theories.
theories.
I'm the exact same way. So, yeah, these people are definitely doing all the speculating that there is to do. But they're not just speculating and like talking. They're actually talking to these people who made these connections. They're talking to law enforcement. They're trying to get FBI involved. They're actually going out with boots on the ground, knocking on doors. Like someone said this guy was a serial killer, and they're going knocking on their door. So they're very much trying to get to the bottom of this, and it's not just talk like us.
I was thinking, that's probably, I feel like, the draw to true crime in the first place, right? People love to speculate, like the whodunit kind of thing, like the mysteries. I feel like people love a mystery. So the ones that are unsolved and people feel like they can speculate, I think kind of part of the draw to true crime in general.
Yeah, exactly. And now I think that's how, I mean, not a lot, not a ton, but that's how some crimes even get solved now, is just web sleuths kind of connecting the dots, or people coming forward because they saw something online. So it's not just, you know, this fascination with the mystery. It's actually can help a case. So
yeah.
It's super interesting.
Like, have you seen like the documentary Don't Fuck with Cats? Like that's like web sleuths in that one.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think like, yeah, it leads to like a lot of leads and stuff where people, like, people spend hours and upon hours looking at every little detail, and so you never know what can come up from a web sleuth, right? Like most of the time, it could just be like adding fuel to the fire of like conspiracy theories or whatever, but every so often there could be one that actually does lead to something substantial. So,
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm going to go into some of these theories briefly, but even if a lot of these really end up not having anything to do with a Long Island serial killer, it's interesting because like someone should probably look into a lot of these further, because there's clearly like a lot of sinister things going on out there that not necessarily uncovered for the first time in this docuseries, but kind of shed a lot of light onto what's actually out there. So going further into what AJ was saying about the body parts showing up in 2 different places, I kind of touched on this already, but one theory that was brought forward was that they kind of touched on slightly was the idea that there, like I said, was more than one killer, as the disposals of the Gilgo 4 was very different than the other 6. And so some people suggest that the Gilgo 4 were killed by a, quote, collector type killer who likes to lay out its victims like a collector. And as we know, they were all kind of laid out 4 in a row. And the other ones were killed by a more sadistic killer who dismembers the victims and doesn't see the need to lay them out in like a neat little line like the other one. And the fact that the body parts were found years after original parts were found for some of the victims, like I said, it was like the original killer was marking its territory by spreading the victims out to show that this was his territory type of thing. Or that he saw the Long Island serial killer as a competitor and was kind of challenging him. To me, this does kind of seem like a bit far off, but apparently it did happen in Long Island before where killers were working at the same time. So apparently a serial killer, Joel Rifkin, and another killer, Robert Schulman, were killing in the same area, kind of the same dumping grounds in Long Island in the 90s. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities as it's happened before. So I want to go back to Dr. Peter Hackett for a minute as well, because of course he seems like an important player. He comes up in this docuseries as well. And so if you remember from the last episode, Dr. Peter Hackett, he lived in the same neighborhood that Shannan had disappeared from. And like I mentioned, John Ray, who was the Gilbert family attorney, he claims that they did have significant evidence that Dr. Peter Hackett called Shannan's mother, saying that he ran a home for wayward women. And that he says Shannan had been there, but then she left and he was worried about her because she never returned. So, like I said, he originally denied saying all this, but he does eventually come forward and say that he did call Shannan's mother out of concern. There's actually very little actual confirmed evidence regarding Dr. Peter Hackett. And of course, some people believed that he was Lisk. Some people believe that he wasn't, but he could have still killed Shannan. So it wasn't the same person that killed the other ones. If someone different that killed Shannan, they think maybe it could have been Dr. Peter Hackett for some reason. Other people believe that he really didn't have anything to do with it, but that he just kind of wanted to stick his nose in the investigation for some very odd reason, kind of like he liked the drama type of thing. And I have to admit, like, when I first heard about this case and heard about Dr. Peter Hackett, like, I was super suspicious of him. I was like, they're going to find out that it was him, because after all this kind of went down, he was in the media a lot, and then finally he kind of moved away from that area just to get away from everything, so it seemed like he got caught and he bailed out of there. But as reported by 48 Hours, the former chief of detectives, who AJ mentioned before, Dominic Veroni, says that Dr. Peter Hackett, quote, "He's an individual who likes to get involved. Some call him a storyteller and an exaggerator. We certainly believe that he may have called to offer his assistance," end quote. So it does kind of seem like he just wanted to stick his nose in, kind of be a part of the investigation, even though he really had nothing to do with it. And it kind of backfired because people were like pointing the finger at him.
So it's just a weird dude who, for some reason, wanted to interject.
Well, yeah, and he does seem like super dramatic. There's like footage of him where reporters are going up to him, asking him questions about Shannan and why did he call and did he have anything to do with it? And then it's like super bad acting. He's acting like he's almost like he's having a heart attack, and they said, "Oh, my defibrillator made my defibrillator act up." And then it's almost like he almost collapses to the ground, and then he gets in his car, and then someone's like, "Oh, can I call you a doctor?" He's like, "Oh, I am a doctor," and then he just kind of like speeds away. So it's like, I don't know, it's like super weird, like a dramatic scene that has really bad acting, but it was like real. It was him.
Like, it's just weird. Like no one does this, I feel like, unless you are just very strange. And if you are that strange, then maybe you're up to some other shit that should be looked at.
I know. That's why I was super suspicious about him at first. But I mean, there really isn't any evidence against him that he did anything. So kind of got to leave him alone, I guess. So another connection that people are trying to make that was touched on in the killing season was the fact that a couple years before the Gilgo 4 had been found, a few hours south of Gilgo Beach, there was a similar dumping ground that was found. And it was 4 white women. They were all sex workers, all laid out in a single line near a body of water. So super similar to the Gilgo Beach findings. These bodies were found near Atlantic City. So like a little bit from Gilgo Beach, but still not unreasonable to think that a killer was like traveling around the coast. And there was even 4 victims found in Daytona Beach, Florida, that some thought could have been connected because the timeline worked out as if the killer was traveling along the coast. And none of the murders in the different areas overlapped, so it could have made sense that the killer was killing in one area, moved to a different area, killed there. So it wasn't like 2 people were killing at the same time. It did match as if one person could be connected to all of these. So they're thinking maybe the killer was changing MOs in different places to kind of cover their tracks. So it was still kind of similar enough for them to be like, if it was like a collector killer, like we said, lining them up, that seemed consistent. kind of the way they were killed was a little bit different. So that's another theory. So also when they were looking into this, they uncovered patterns all over the United States that looks like many serial killer dumping grounds with hundreds of victims found across the country. There's hundreds of bodies that were plotted on this map across the US, with thousands estimated to be out there, because all the ones that they had actually found were entered into the database called VICAP, which is the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. But they said that entering bodies and murder victims into that program or that database isn't mandatory, so there's a lot of murdered people that aren't actually entered in there. And so they found hundreds, like I think over 500 people that were entered in there that seemed to fit these patterns of like a serial killer. So that's really scary, because there's like could be dozens of serial killers out there across the country, and more that they don't know of, because all these patterns and bodies haven't actually been entered into these databases. And so, of course, all this is going back to the Long Island serial killer, because they're trying to see if they're finding the same patterns elsewhere in the country, to see if maybe this person is traveling around and didn't just kill in Long Island, but was killing throughout different places. And so they're not necessarily seeing the same pattern, but they are seeing like just a pattern of what could be different serial killers everywhere. Another thing that they come across is the Wikipedia page on the Long Island serial killer, or the Gilgo Beach killer, that somebody had updated, and where it used to say Gilgo Beach killer, somebody updated it to a former corrections officer named Joseph Fody, saying that he was actually the killer. And so when they track down the IP address of the person who actually made this edit, they find out that it was posted by someone who was actually using the Suffolk County Police Department's IP address. So this makes them think that maybe somebody inside the police department thinks that Joseph Fody was the killer, but they couldn't prove it, and they were just putting his name out there. The two documentarians, Joshua and Rachel, try and track down all the Joe Fodys in the area to try and talk to them. And they actually do get a call back from the Joe Fody that used to be a corrections officer in Suffolk County. And, they tell him about the post, and they're saying that somebody using the police department's IP address is posting this about you. Like, why do you think they're doing that? Like, does somebody know something about you? And he doesn't seem too concerned. His attitude is that, oh, that's just a rumor. It will play itself out. There's nothing that he can do about it, so just leave it alone. Their plan was actually to record their conversation with this guy, and then they wanted to play it for Amanda, who we talked about before, was Melissa Bartholomew's sister, and she was one of the people that had gotten a call from the serial killer, one of those taunting phone calls. So they wanted to play this recording for her to see if she could identify the voice and say like, oh yeah, that is the same person that called me. So they do play this recording for her of Joe Fody, and ultimately she's like really just not sure if it's him. She says the person on the phone recording had too much of a strong New York accent to be the person that had originally called her with those taunting phone calls. So really that theory doesn't go anywhere. It's just maybe somebody, for whatever reason, was playing a trick on this Joe Fody guy, putting his name as a serial killer, or somebody, had an axe to grind. They didn't like him and they were trying to get revenge for something. So that didn't really go anywhere.
But couldn't the guy have like disguised his voice on the phone call to that woman? Like maybe you want to make the taunting phone call, but maybe you want to disguise your voice a little bit so that it's not 100%.
That's exactly what she says as well. She's like, now it sounds like he has too much of a New York accent, but then she's like, but he could have been, disguising his voice back then. Because of that, she's not sure. She's not like, oh, that definitely is him. But from what she can tell, it just doesn't sound enough like him for her to be that concerned.
Did they ever record like his taunting phone calls? I wonder. Like that would be because they have or they have to just rely on her memory of what his voice sounded like. Because by this point, it's been like 10 years or whatever, 14 years since she got those phone calls. So maybe she's like, although maybe it's one of those things that's ingrained in her memory, she'll never forget it. But if she had an actual recording, it's easier to compare.
Yeah, I don't think they actually have a recording of the voice. I don't think there's any way they could have prepared for, him calling. So unfortunately, they don't have that. And yeah, her memory is probably probably doesn't remember as much as she thinks she would have, but according to her, it just didn't sound enough like him.
Because like I feel like memories memories are not 100% reliable, right? Especially as you go on that far. Like you obviously remember it, but like it would be so helpful if you had like the recording to literally compare voices. Because you're just going based on her memory, and maybe she's like unconsciously changing it in her mind as to what the voice sounded like, even though. And also can be different to different people, right? Like people can hear the voice and think it sounds one way, and other people can think it sounds the other way. So if you actually had both, you could compare, like, okay, for sure. And other people could kind of weigh in. But when you're relying on one person's memory of a call they got more than 10 years ago, you know, like to her, it's not similar, but who knows?
I know, that's true. Yeah, I don't think there's any way they could ever actually compare it because they don't have the original voice. So, yeah, so like I said, this kind of didn't go anywhere, the voice of this guy. So they didn't have anything else to do with that.
To me, like, I don't think I would be able to, like, remember what the voice sounded like for that long period of time. Like, I feel like voices change over time and your memories change too. So I feel like even if it was the voice, it'd be hard to know because, like, different accents, like you were saying, different things. It just, I don't know, to me, it'd be really hard to focus on whether that was a voice or not. And yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And they even asked her at the beginning, like, do you think you'd be able to identify his voice? And she was like, well, maybe, but she wasn't super confident. Unless, of course, the person that she talked to had very distinctive, like, lisp or stutter or something like that. Like, obviously, that would be more easier to identify. But yeah, just a regular voice from how many years ago, I think it would be super hard to be super confident about it. In this documentary, they really do kind of try to go down every lead that they're getting from people. And they even talk to members of biker gangs that are involved in organized crime. They talk to a truck driver murderer who's in prison. And he was a serial killer, I guess, who was a truck driver. He would travel along the main highways in the States and dump bodies along the highway. And he explains that there are at least 7 other serial murder truck drivers that he personally knows that are still out there. Now, whether that's true, he did name one of them. This person was already in jail. He wasn't going to name the other one. So, I mean, whether he's just saying that for attention, whether just trying to sensationalize things, or whether there actually is that many serial murder truck drivers out there that, like, nobody knows about. It's kind of a scary thing to think about. And when you look at, like, these maps of all these people that they kind of found along in the States, they're all along these major highways, and a lot of them are sex workers. So it does kind of make sense, his theory that he's saying a lot of these truck drivers pick up sex workers and kill them and dump them along the highway. And he says that that's, like, kind of all they used to talk about was sex workers and the killings that they did. So it's kind of like this group of serial killers. And he said the trick was to dump bodies across different state lines. So, like we were talking about before, so it's harder for authorities to kind of connect the dots. And of course, another secret was to dump them nowhere near where you personally live. So it wasn't like you're dumping close to your own personal, communities. So people really didn't have any connection to you at all.
That just seems like common sense.
It does. But I mean,
Like,
people, like, it happens a lot though. People go back to where they're familiar. So if they're familiar with an area, they feel more safe, like, dumping something there because they know the roads, they know the people, they know no one's going to be out there, that kind of thing. So, yeah. And they also look into the West Mesa serial killings, and it's kind of interesting what they uncover there. Like, they bring people out to do these ground surveys of other places where they think bodies have been buried that have never been found. And of course, none of this is related to the Long Island serial killer they find. Like, they're all very different and distinct, but it's just super interesting what they uncover. So if you're interested in that kind of thing and, like, want to go down these rabbit holes, check out the killing season.
well, it's interesting too that you would, like, mention that, because as you were talking, I was thinking of, like, oh yeah, what's that serial killer that, like, they had? The West Mesa one is the one where they have, like, those satellite images, right? Of, like, where it looks like people are digging, where it, like, looks like there's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, it's like
things that have been dug or buried.
Yeah, they have, like, satellite images of the area where it's, like, completely normal, and then a couple years later they have it again, and you can tell there's, like, these been places that have been dug up. So yeah.
Yeah, because when you were talking about that, I was thinking, like, oh, that's creepy. I wonder if there's any connection to this, because, like, if you're saying this, one person's going to all these different areas and, like, dumping bodies. So it's funny that, like, you also mentioned that there. I was like, oh yeah, I was trying to think, like, what was that serial killer's name? Or like what the West Mesa killer, but yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't find any connection between the West Mesa killers either, because of course that's very different as well. This person was burying all the bodies, and a lot of those people they're sex workers as well, but they're related to kind of the drug trade and drug trafficking and things like that. So very different, but still super interesting and sad that a lot of these, like that case is still unsolved too, the West Mesa killings. But yeah, so kind of went on a little bit of a side story here, but I just find it crazy that how many serial killers they actually think are out there right now. A lot of them are preying on, of course, like the vulnerable communities, sex workers, things like that. But they're out there. Like there's a lot of serial killers. And like I said, none of the leads or information lead back to the Long Island serial killer, but just interesting to go down all these paths. And so kind of getting away from all these conspiracy theories, we're going to go back to the actual case. Like, what did the police actually know? What was their investigation uncovering? But we're going to get into that in our next episode, so stay tuned for that. Do you guys think that, I mean, I don't know if you know the outcome yet of this case, but do you think that the Long Island serial killer was moving around and did have other dumping grounds? Or do you think like this was it, kept coming back to the same one? Or was he traveling around? Like, what are your opinions?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, I mean, I do know the outcome of this case. Like, I've looked into it. I know all the most recent updates that have happened, which we're going to get into. But I still think even though we know a lot, or think we know a lot, I mean, we still can't know everything. So, I mean, I think who really knows how many people one person has killed? Can we rely on when they, like, if they ever do come forward and admit how many they killed? Like, I don't know. I feel like there is still the possibility that this person was moving around, or maybe there is like just like a lot of shitty people who are like multiple people that are killing in the same area that are dumping bodies, and maybe they aren't connected at all. But I feel like you still can never fully know, really. So maybe, yeah, this Long Island serial killer was moving around and just doing all of those things, like killing in multiple jurisdictions, so the police don't put it together instantly. And I think it's certainly possible that one person can go and kill like hundreds of people in multiple different areas, and no one will ever really know. So I think while we still know a lot based on the recent developments, I still think there is a high chance that there's a lot more victims than we even to this day know that have yet to be found.
Yeah, I'm with AJ. Like, I do know what the outcome of this case is just from researching it. But like he said, like, I don't know all the details and whether or not whatever the outcome is of this case. Like, I don't know all the details. So for me to say like, oh, there was bodies spread around town, like, I don't know that. But it kind of makes sense for serial killers to do that, just to make it harder for the police to find everybody and connect the dots. But going back to like the West Mesa thing, like, and the biker gang information, like, it's crazy to think like how many serial killers or how many people are out there just randomly killing people. Like, it's crazy to like think that, like, we just do like certain cases, but there's so many out there, like, unmurdered people. It's ridiculous. Like, it's so crazy and really scary to think of. But yeah, like, going back, I was just backtracking a little bit, but just going back to this case, yeah, it's really hard to say like what all the details are and like how it's all going to play out. I mean, I know how it plays out, but we never know if whatever happens, if that's going to be the end of it or is it going to be more. Like, we don't know all the details.
Yeah, because like I feel like in terms of the outcome, like, okay, I mean, we can just say it, like, we know the person who's been arrested and charged with the killing, but as far as I know, like, this person is still ongoing, right? Like, I don't think his trial has happened. Like, there's been no trial, there's been no like confirmed numbers. So until that, we don't know if it's going to end up he's be charged with more. Like, maybe they'll find more bodies, maybe they'll say he wasn't responsible for all of them. Like, we don't know the full details of it yet, which are still forthcoming. So it could end up that it is going to be in the dozens and dozens or hundreds even. Who knows?
Yeah.
Because if this person, like say for like, if this person killed Peaches back in 97 and then also these people in 2010, like, that's 13 years. Who knows how many people he can kill in that amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. And there could be another dumping ground that we just that hasn't been discovered yet, because, you know, this one, you know, could still not have been discovered if it wasn't for Shannan Gilbert going missing in that area. So, I mean, yeah, who knows what else is out there that they haven't uncovered yet. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine how many dumping grounds there could be out there in the world? Like, there's probably like thousands. That's just like super scary to think of.
Yeah, there's so many serial killers out there that people haven't even like discovered or connected the dots yet, which is scary when you like look into all of that. So
Yeah. And we just like happen to know about this particular dumping ground because, like you said, it was Shannan Gilbert. But who knows if this one person could have had hundreds of those in many different states, even, right? And we still haven't discovered them yet. And like, if this person who's arrested and whatever is like denying the charges, they're never going to come out and say the exact number. So until then, we can only speculate because we don't know.
yeah, exactly.
So there's still lots of questions because you don't know which ones can be connected to who, or if they are multiple like separate people. Like, you'll never really know those answers. Yeah, so that's where we're going to end it for part 2 of this deep dive. In the next part, we're going to go a little bit more into the police investigation, the botched police investigation. Surprise, surprise, there's some of that in this case as well, which seems to be every fucking case we do. But anyway, so we're going to be going a little bit more into the police investigation and kind of like what it ends up leading to in this case that we've sort of been alluding to so far, but we don't want to like completely spoil it. So we're going to like not talk about it in depth until we get there. But yeah, so just crazy that all these like this cold case from 97 is connected to this, and we have all these bodies, and it's just, yeah, it's wild to me. And it is one of those cases where all those people, like all the conspiracy theories kind of are out there, and the longer a case goes on without being solved, the more conspiracy theories are going to pop up. So that they are very much a part of this case, the conspiracy theories, even if most of them are garbage. Like, you can't talk about this case without kind of going down that rabbit hole into all the different possibilities. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed listening to part 2. Join us next week for part 3, where I said we're going to go into more of the police investigation. So you can find us on social media. We're on all the social medias, Crime Family Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, or at Crime Family Pod 1 on Twitter or X. And we're on YouTube now, so you can follow us there and subscribe to listen to all of our episodes on YouTube. And you can get merch for the show if you would like at the link in the show notes. And you can join our Patreon page for some extra bonus content throughout the season as well. If you would like, the link to that is in the show notes as well. And continue to engage with us. Leave us a comment, leave us a rating on your podcast app. We would love to hear your feedback and your reviews and all of that stuff. You can send us an email, crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com, with case suggestions or feedback or anything you would like if you just want to get in touch with us. You can also visit our website at crimefamilypodcast.ca. Have all of our episode descriptions and transcripts and all of that kind of stuff, and links to all of our socials and our Patreon and all that stuff as well. So lots of ways you can interact with us and engage, and we hope to engage with you at some point. So thank you so much. We'll see you next week for part 3 of the Long Island serial killer deep dive. And until then, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.